fly that we are tying tonight is going to be Blane Chocklett's Hybrid. This is one variation of the fly that I'm tying that utilizes polar fiber over the top of a flash blend bait fish brush. We use a variety of sizes to kind of build this thing up. Figured out that for me, I can comfortably tie these flies from about 4.5 inches up to 12, 13, 14 inches. Most of these brushes go up to 5-inch in size. Usually one false cast, most of this fly sheds all the water that it's holding because this flash blend brush does not soak any water. This is a stiff synthetic material that there is really nothing in here for the water to absorb into and hold on. The polar fiber, this stuff will soak a little more water at its core where it's wrapped around the braid, but this stuff doesn't soak a ton because overall it's a pretty thin fiber. So that being said, we're going to get started. What I prefer doing with my tail shanks is tying in a longer shank, particularly a 25mm, and then cutting that. So that 1-inch brush, we're going to take one end of the brush, does not matter which end, it's both the same. Lock that in nice and tight so it's not coming out. And I'm going to palmer that brush forward, and I want you guys to be pretty conscious of every rotation you make of this brush. I want you guys to get in there. You can use a wire brush. I like to use my scissor tips, so I just kind of go in on all sides of the fly and make sure that material and that brush, all those fibers, is standing upright and isn't trapped amongst itself. I just want all the fibers to be straight. And number of rotations here, I would say a good 4 to 6 rotations. I want to build a pretty good bump. The tail we're tying on this one is going to be a flicker tail. You can also utilize a marabou or mop tail on the back side of the fly, which if you opt out to go the marabou or mop tail route, that would be the first thing I'm adding on to the shank. I'd be tying the mop or the marabou onto the shank and then going over that with the brush. So once I get that brush tied off, I'll kind of come back onto the brush just a little bit. So I'm hoping at least 1/8 of an inch here for working room. I would like to see more of about 1/4 of an inch if you guys can get it. And don't be afraid to wrap back over the brush a little bit. It's never a problem. Next up to bat for me is going to be, this is a whiting American rooster. With me, what I'll do in some of these flicker tails is I'll utilize a couple grizzly feathers to start. And just for a reference, the size of the tail, I want this tail to be good size. I'm tying a pretty good sized bug. It's going to be about 8 inches by the time I get done. So the feathers that I selected, they're wide and they don't narrow down too much on the tip. And basically what we're going to do is we're going to tie each one of these feathers in, and our goal is to kind of go, think of it as going one on the left flank, so one on the left side of the shank tied in, another on the right flank tied in, and then it's almost like we're trying to get the feathers to wrap all the way around, kind of in a circle around this ball of flash blend that I tied in. Cut that feather at its base, and I've stripped the bottom end of the stem. So right at the end of that stem, where it's been stripped, I'm on my left hand side. I tied the feather on like so. Once I've done that, I'm going to replicate, try and get close if you can on the length of the feather, but instead of here, I'm going to rotate and go on the other side. I like to use my index finger to kind of pinch the feather down, lock it into place. So now I have 2 feathers tied in. I'll shift over to my solid color here now. So I'm going to go with 4 of these total. So I'm pulling 4 feathers right along that same size range as those first 2 I tied in. And what I'm going to do with these solid flow yellow chartreuses is I'm going to go basically on the top of the other 2 feathers that I tied. But instead of laying the stems so they're right on top of each other, I'm going to take that fluorescent yellow and I'm going to go just a little bit over the edge of that other one. So I'm kind of working and walking my way up to make that cover, so to speak, all the way around. Another feather Same process here. Now I have kind of a cool transparent look where you can see the grizzly, but I actually kind of have a veil over the top of it where it kind of mutes the dark barring of the grizzly, which is cool. You could add 2 more if you wanted over the top, but I feel like this is going to do its job well. 3/4 now on the polar, tying that in right ahead of that feather, and same process here with wrapping. And the kind of the goal what you guys will want to watch as we go forward is you want to be mindful of the amount of wraps of polar fiber that you're putting on. Kind of the way I've seen it and the way that it's been articulated to me is it's about 2/3 flash blend, 1/3 polar fiber. So the bulk of the shank, it's going to be less polar fiber than flash blend. Hand plucking is going to be part of the process tonight. It's going to be a big part of this fly. So if you guys take a moment to look at the polar fiber brush, you'll notice there's always going to be a handful of materials, fibers in there that are going to be a lot longer and just sticking out. And what I'm doing there is I'm just going in by hand and kind of pulling and thinning that down to where it's a little bit shorter. Not ton, but getting rid of those longer length fibers in there. Not as big of a deal when you're on the tail section, but something that will be a little bit more important as we advance forward in the fly. Finishing touch on this tail is going to be my handy UV resin. Another trick for you guys if you're having a hard time getting your feathers where you like them or getting them to stay put, you can definitely use the resin before tying on the polar fiber brush to kind of secure and lock those feathers in place. Light. We are moving to our next shank. So smaller fly guys, you're using a 10 millimeter. Larger ones, you guys can go to a 15. Once you guys have that situated, we're going to close that 15 or 10 mil shank up. Good solid thread base. We are going back to 1-inch flash blend. Tied in, palmer forward, scissor tips. And remember, 2/3 flash blend, 1/3 polar fiber. So more flash blend than polar fiber. And then here I'm going to do a little bit of trimming, not nearly as much as what I did on the back side, but I do a little bit of trimming on those long ends of the flash blend, just to kind of get everything to level up. Back on our 3/4 program again, polar fiber, tying that in, and palmering. Combing out, critical. Finishing off. And this is essentially the same process we're going to replicate as we go through and finish this fly up every shank that we go forward on. We're going to utilize that same layout. We're just going to get bigger with brushes. We prefer to finish. Next step will be jumping to another 10 or another 15. And then you guessed it, same thing. Still running the 1-inch flash blend and 3/4 polar fiber. SA 280 Minnow. Ready to rock all 8 inches of glory.